This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Save 10% by visiting www.squarespace.com/Hugh and using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant. And today I want to talk to you about our hands-on experience in Austin, Texas this past week with pre-production versions of the Panasonic Lumix S1 and S1R. By now, you've probably absorbed the first impressions from the global launch event in Barcelona, but Claudia and I have a different take on these cameras than most, beginning with this. They are spectacular. Not gorgeous industrial design spectacular, not without their issues spectacular, not without the fascinating paradox spectacular, but functionally and ergonomically spectacular. Before we get into it, though, a note from our friendly neighborhood Department of Commerce that coming up March 25th, which is just about a month from now, we're holding a really special 3-day street photography workshop in New York City. My co-host will be fellow YouTuber and dear friend Ted Forbes. With the support of our friends at Hasselblad, I'm delighted to tell you we'll be holding our class sessions in their beautiful NoHo New York Experience studio. And, of course, we'll be shooting on the streets of New York. This is equal parts fieldwork, classwork, class trip, philosophy, ethics, technique, historical perspective, group discussion, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to spend time with a group of like-minded people in one of the greatest places on earth for the genre. Space is limited, and the dates are fast approaching, so if you're interested, please visit www.3bmep.com/streetsofny for details. Okay. I'm going to keep this relatively short. Who are we kidding? Because our time with the cameras was relatively short, less than 24 hours, and because although the firmware had been updated since Barcelona, it had only advanced to version 0.7 by the time we got to Austin. So, right, everything that comes next is with the usual these weren't production ready, plus one other thing. There has never been a new product introduced, of which I'm aware, without teething pains, and at this point, we just can't know what they are. But here's what I can tell you. 1. From its 5.7 million dot variable eye relief EVF and outstanding pixel shift technology, even in the 24 megapixel S1, which I can't show you because I forgot to take out a card from one of the cameras when I returned it, but I'll put a link into our review of the G9 with the same tech and you'll be able to extrapolate, to its class-leading 6 stops of IBIS, the first dedicated and workable physical autofocus switch, yay, innovations like the IS scope to help you steady yourself, the fact that the S uses the same stonkin' big battery as the medium format Leica S, whoa, the Lumix S Series offers on day one the most thoroughly considered and ergonomically complete body of any full-frame mirrorless camera out there today, full stop. Though, okay, among all currently available full-frame mirrorless cameras, in my book, the Leica M, most especially the Leica M10D, and the SL still set the bar for breakthrough industrial design. In fact, like the M and the SL, I think the Lumix S shell, the body, is a design for the ages. I think it will have a long life because the ergos are so good, the controls so well weighted and placed, build quality so superb, and it's big enough to do whatever one might want to do in the future, including, I can imagine, taking out the IBIS a la the GH5S, which, by the way, is a big component of the weight, replacing the sensor with a 12 megapixel dual ISO unit, and adding an electronic variable neutral density filter, for example. Though, like the original Leica of 1925 or the Hasselblad 1600F of 1948, I suspect there will be a number of subtle changes over time, even with an iconic starting point. Beginning, I hope, with moving the on-off switch back to a collar around the shutter release, just like the G9. And maybe moving the joystick a few millimeters and making it more like the one on the SL. And okay, bringing out a firmware update to extend the internal timer for long exposure to, I don't know, 10 minutes? 2. The image quality delivered by the combination of new sensors, new processor, and new glass is outstanding. on par with or exceeding every one of its competitors I've ever used. Noise at ISO 51200 was wonderfully low, but what really struck me were the tonality and most especially the colors there. They are the least compromised I've ever seen, reminding me of the reaction I had when I first saw imagery from Panasonic's GH5S. Though it also has to be said that the nature of the noise reduction on the S series is not dissimilar to that of Sony's. It works well for angular or inanimate objects like vehicles, buildings, and signs, less well with faces, which can get pretty smeary. And B, I did notice moire, as you can see here in my shirt. 3, build quality is outstanding, in a league of its own in the mirrorless world, save for Leicas, which 4 also means for a mirrorless camera, this is one heavy sucker. About 400 grams heavier than a Nikon Z6, 200 grams heavier than the SL, 100 grams heavier than the Sony a7 III, about the same as the Nikon D850 DSLR, but hold that thought too. Well, no, let's not do that, because even though it is heavy, reminding me actually of nothing so much as the Leica S-Type medium format 007 with 70mm Sumerit, Claudia keeps telling me she doesn't care how much it weighs because she thinks it's awesome. And I do too, which means I just have to suck it up. But it also means if you like the size and feel of a traditional DSLR with room for your fingers and a nice solid heft, you're going to feel right at home with the S1 or S1R, which is still half a kilo lighter in either case than the Canon 1DX2. By the way, Claudia also wonders if Leica marketing people really like James Bond, and I'm stunned I hadn't thought of it myself. I mean, M, head of MI6. Q, head of gadgets. Type 007, I mean, come on.
Bond. James Bond.
Next. 5. Contrary to my first reaction, that monstrous $2,300 non-image stabilized 50mm 1.4 is worth every bit as much as the similarly priced and our 2018 honorable mention lens of the year, Canon RF 50mm 1.2, which, by the way, I just saw on sale for $200 less, now at $2,100. I say this because A, the 1.4's AF is quieter and faster. B, the 1.4's resolution, sharpness, and pop edge to edge are as good or better wide open while giving up somewhere between just 1/3 and 1/2 stop of light. And C, on first blush, to be confirmed in side-by-side tests, focus breathing on the Lumix S Pro 50 is better controlled. On the flip side, it is less than half the price of Leica's own $5,300 Summilux L, a touch smaller, a touch lighter, and able to focus a touch closer too. On the other hand, Canon's only 51.4, a lens I owned for years and enjoyed, not because it was tack sharp or contrasty wide open, but precisely because it wasn't, can still be had new for $350. How times have changed. But yeah, okay, it's still the case that 6. As of 0.7 firmware, the Lumix team haven't yet managed to deliver video autofocus performance that matches the very best from Sony and Canon, and I anticipate that the A9's IAF and real-time tracking AF in firmware release 5.0 for video or stills will still smoke the S series firmware at 1.0, especially for sports and cocktail party shots. I don't expect a quantum leap forward comparable to what Fujifilm pulled off going from the X-T2 to the X-T3. However, 7. Even in pre-production, the S series AF is the best I've seen from a Panasonic camera, notably better than the G9, which was already notably better than the updated GH5, good enough for our Anthem 1 behind-the-scenes shoot. Better than the Nikon Z7 we tested, which is not uninteresting. Sufficient for what we do in stills work, as it is right now. I'm anticipating it will be sufficient for what we do in video, with some fine-tuning I hope is sorted by 1.0. In this talking head test, for example, I still need to do a touch of fine-tuning, having gotten close quickly by setting the AF to 225 point, sensitivity to 0, and speed to +3. It didn't really do the business in face detect, but again, early days. Maybe 1.0 will actually have a YouTuber setting, maybe a two-shot interview setting where just like IAF, you can choose left or right subject, though if you have to make that choice, your depth of field is pretty well guaranteed to be too shallow to begin with. Between Panasonic's engineers and, frankly, fellow YouTuber Gerald Undone to show me the way, I am cautiously optimistic. And has been the case in the real world, even when shooting with the GH5 and G9. That is to say, no whack-a-mole, now you see it, now you don't test cases. The S's video autofocus in our pre-production samples was smooth and organic, cinematic, really, really nice. There were only one or two instances of focus hunting while shooting at night up to ISO 51200, which was a pleasant surprise, as I've seen as much from Sony's too. And it was much better than the Leica SL I tested last year, which I loved. Did I ever see flutter? Well, in continuous mode for stills, yes. In video, occasionally. Single AF mode for stills, so little as to be truly irrelevant. And it was eye-blink fast for single-shot stills. Do I think Panasonic's contrast detect-only DFD AF will get better? Well, in an age of growing algorithm sophistication, much more powerful processors, and firmware updates, yeah, I do. Do I wish the S system were hybrid AF with phase detect as well? Yes, that would put this to bed for everyone. But again, for us, your mileage may vary. My tentative conclusion is that AF will no longer be the primary issue, overtaken by other concerns like handling, functionality, etc., where the S is unparalleled in the full-frame mirrorless world. With that out of the way, it seems as good a time as any to break for a moment to tell you a bit more about Squarespace. I've been using Squarespace myself for at least 4 years, maybe 5, and I've done so because their designer website templates are gorgeous, clean, easy to customize. Their customer support has been superb, which has been critical for me. The takeaway is very simple. Whether it's a portfolio, blog, swag shop, or more, from marketing tools to analytics, Squarespace frees you to do the business. Okay, back to the Lumix S, and what are we up to? 8? While these cameras are not speed demons when you compare their burst rates, say, to the much more expensive $4,500 Sony A9, the dirty little secret, because it is so poorly understood, is that their 6K mode, simply an engraved letter and number on a dial to me until this past week, allows you to shoot 30 frames per second, no blackout. That's 10 frames per second faster than the A9, with little real-world consequence for most of us. If you don't know it, the 6K mode will crop in slightly to yield 18 megapixel images compared to the A9's uncropped 24. Do I see a difference when I look closely and compare it to the S1 or S1R shot at full resolution? Why, yes, I do. But that's a for me thing, not a for my daughter's dance company website as a favor to the school owner thing. But it shouldn't matter even if it's a this is for the cover of Sports Illustrated thing. Consider this image of Olympic diver Greg Louganis hitting his head on the board at the '88 Olympics, taken by Pulitzer Prize winning photographer and friend Brian Smith with a 35mm, I think it was a Nikon F3. It won first place in the World Press Photo and Pictures of the Year competitions that year. Never mind the S. The 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds G9 shooting 6K is capable of cleaner shots. Still, yes. 9. You no longer have to hold this thought. If sports is your thing and you want every advantage, 31 years later, the A9 is flat out a better capture tool than the S. While we're at it, if you want every advantage for fashion shoots, the A7R III and A7 III are better, but only when 10/10 IAF performance is required, at least compared to the pre-production samples we had. I have no doubt, however, that in the hands of a capable photographer, the S Series AF will get you there no problem even now. And the S is brilliant while we're at it with pixel shift for product shots. Period. Finally, and here's the paradox, 10. The S is so good, taken as a whole, so close to the holy grail already, even before we reach 1.0 firmware, that I find myself thinking of, well, Sean Connery again, this time playing Indiana Jones's dad in The Last Crusade. They finally find the grail, remember? But even it is not without its trade-offs.
We have got it! Come on!
Elsa,
Elsa, don't move.
It's ours, Indy. Yours and mine.
Elsa, don't cross the seal. The knight warned us not to take the grail from here.
A moment later, Indy loses sight of the bigger picture. He's still dazzled by the thought of holding the grail in his hand, and he's going for it until Henry, who has been searching for the grail his whole life, puts it into perspective.
I can get it. I can almost reach it, Dad.
Indiana? Indiana? Let it go.
I'll put it to you differently. The paradox is that as the Lumix S approaches, for us, as always, your mileage may vary, holy grail status. Really, all it needs is the last 9 or 10/10ths autofocus of the best Sonys. It simultaneously makes a compelling case for the appeal of Micro Four Thirds and APS-C. Letting go of the full-frame dream. At least to those of us who buy gear rather than sell it. Crop sensor cameras are dramatically smaller, lighter, less expensive, and can do almost as well in the real world for the vast majority of us, the vast majority of the time, especially when you take into account the glass. A new G9, for example, from which the S derives its design vocabulary, is at $1,300 and 579 grams body only, basically half the price and weight of an S1. The Leica DG12 to 62.8 to 4 is at $800 and 320 grams, again, half the price and weight of the S24-105 f4. And while I don't enjoy the ergos, don't tolerate the menu system the way I once did, wonder why Sony insists that a 180-degree flip-up rear panel is good for vlogging, and lament the absence of IBIS or a wide range of crop sensor coverage lenses from which to choose, the new $900 400-gram APS-C Sony 6400 arrives with incredible AF, no recording limit, and stellar 4K video. The APS-C coverage, $423, 150 grams Sony 3518, is somewhere between 1/5 and 1/6 the cost of the S Pro 51.4, between 1/6 and 1/7 the weight. And then there's Fuji. Of course, there are clear differences in image quality, robustness, weather sealing, minimum depth of field, blah, 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 blah. Yes, really, I get it. I appreciate it. But I let go of full frame 4 or 5 years ago. My last full frame camera was the Canon 5D2, and I've been happy ever since with what I've got. Micro Four Thirds for our professional work, APS-C now for my personal work. I find myself thinking, if the S did have autofocus as good as the A9, if it did have an internal neutral density filter, and if it did have a flippy screen, would I actually value the S's incremental advantages of better high ISO performance, better color, better resolution, better AF, and shallower depth of field when using AF compared to the Micro Four Thirds GH5 we have now, enough to bear the costs? In other words, should the S's more technically perfect image quality, discernible in very large prints up close, or more technically perfect image quality, discernible in very large projections of footage up close, at the expense of price and weight, sway me? Would I, or you, pony up somewhere between $2,400 and $3,700 for the body only, another $6,000 to $10,000 or more for the glass, for those advantages? Would I, or you, take on that added weight, the added complexity and headache of most likely having to check a Pelican case filled with that gear whenever we flew? Would I, or you, perhaps with greater self-restraint and precision, add just an S1 and that 51.4 for a sub $5,000 total, maybe $6,000 for the S1R instead, for those instances when we truly need low light performance and shallowest depth of field, relying on what we have for the other 99% of the time we don't? Or use that pared down full frame 4A as a street photography go-to in low light? I'm thinking about it. But the small, fast, light, and agile handling APS-C Leica CL really rings my bell. I've never shot above 12,800 in New York at night. I can get to the same shallow depth of field as an f2 full frame with autofocus lenses for a given field of view. I light my scenes. For those of us who don't have the budget or who have different priorities, it's amazing what the little $800 Lumix GX9 with $550 Leica DG15 1.7 can do, or an iPhone with the Focus app. Does the prospect of something as extraordinarily competent, heavy, and expensive as a fully sorted Lumix S cause us to reconsider our quest for the holy grail of cameras, realizing that our crop sensor cameras and crop sensor glass are all that we truly need? or offer a set of trade-offs with which we can more easily live? Does it cause us to reconsider what the Holy Grail is? That the real quest may instead be extracting everything we can from the journey itself, being alive and attuned to what is around us, just showing up unburdened by gear. Are we on the last crusade for the perfect camera, as we've come to understand it over the past century or so, before computational imaging takes over? Or are we at a critical inflection point when our sense of humanity and what we can do with a smartphone supersedes our delight with dedicated gear? Are we on the verge of
Illumination.
Of course, I can't speak for you. Each of us has our own scenarios, budget, and priorities to work through. But for now, this is what the Lumix S has me thinking. Holy Grail, a body for the ages, and paradoxically, a convincing argument for crop sensors. And a whole lot more, actually, but I will await production versions of these cameras before going down that rabbit hole any further. Wow. That is not what I was thinking on the flight down to Texas less than a week ago. Actually, I was thinking, an Embraer 190 is just too small a plane for a 4-hour flight. This video was brought to you by Squarespace. For all your website needs, be sure to head over to squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial, where you can save 10% at checkout by using the discount code Hugh. Thanks, Squarespace. How's that look? Do I have to do these anymore? I don't want to do them anymore. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation below. You guys continue to be just incredible, knowledgeable, inspiring, funny. I mean, you're a joy, truly. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Grab one or both of our new Hold That Thought t-shirts you wanted us to put up at our new 3BMEPthreadless.com store. Support our work by using our affiliate links down below in the show notes, dropping us coffee money via our PayPal link down below in the show notes, or even better than that, we invite you to become a patron of our work over at Patreon. Link down below. We've created our Patreon page because we are stoked to bring you not only gear reviews, but with our What Were You Thinking and Good World Gone Bad series, historical, educational, artistic morsels, and longer form conversations, not interviews, with world-class photographers, curators, gallery owners, keepers of the legacy, folks like Elliot Irwitt, Anya Sear, Mark Lubell, Ethelene Staley, and friends like Brian Smith, Paul Giroux, Nino Rakicevic, and more. We'd really like you to join us to deliver this kind of content regularly. Your support on Patreon will really help us ramp it up. In which case, as always, we thank you for it. That's it. For 3 Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Hugh Brownstone. See you next time.